Hello, and welcome to Compose Carolina, a virtual summer music series presented by the UNC Department of Music and Carolina Performing Arts. I am Alan Anderson. I am a professor, a composer by inclination, and head of the composition area in the UNC Department of Music. Composition plays an important, though often unrecognized, role in all musicians' lives. It is closely related to improvisation, or the art of speaking through one's medium, of creating and ordering utterance, not so much out of thin air, but from an alertness to the possibilities for notes and rhythms, instruments, performers, and circumstance. Composition implies decisions and determinations. It is one of many ways that musicians learn to hear themselves and to understand the shapes of their musical experience. At UNC, we offer a number of classes related to music composition. In addition to a course called simply Composition, which considers music in its notated and largely instrumental forms without particular regard for genre or style, and which aims to help the student realize his individual compositional tendencies, we also offer jazz composition and arranging, songcraft, beat making, courses in music technologies, and improvisation, both as a dedicated study and as a mode of practice within an instrumental studio. And I will add, composition plays a role in the study otherwise called music theory. While the number of students weaving a path through one or more of these classes is somewhat difficult to tally, students taking composition, often for multiple semesters, number between 8 and 12 at any one time. The 6 composers featured in the Compose Carolina series have all been a part of that class. Their musical inclinations run to chamber music, solo writing for their own instrument, music for jazz band, film music, and free improvisation, but I wouldn't want to categorize any one of them too narrowly. Others who have studied composition at UNC have gone on to write for musical theater, video games, ventured into computer music and sound design, write orchestral music, or music for bands. Over 6 weeks, Compose Carolina is featuring students and recent alumni who have written original works that vary in style and instrumentation, but are connected by the common theme, looking forward, interpreted however these musicians pleased. My composition colleagues Stephen Anderson, whose work spans concert and jazz music, and Lee Weisert, whose work is fundamentally informed by wide-ranging music technologies, will join me in introducing and interviewing the featured composers. We're very excited to share what they've created. It's time to hear some music. Let's meet this week's Carolina composer.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Compose Carolina. My name is Lee Weisert. I'm on the faculty at the UNC Music Department. I'm a composer and I teach electronic music and composition. As you've just heard, this series features new works by both current and former UNC music students. And today, I'm very happy and excited to be joined by the composer, Alex McKeveny. Alex, welcome. How's everything going?
Great. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. You are a rising junior, I believe, in the music department, a double major in music and business administration. And I guess we've known each other for a couple years. I believe you've taken 2 composition courses with me, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
and
that's correct.
Mm-hmm. I got to know your music a little bit in those classes. Thinking back to the first class we took, I remember we did a orchestral project that semester, and you wrote just a real stunner of a piece, a 3-movement piece for orchestra. That's the first kind of time I was aware of your creative and compositional skill. And more than anything, I think your grasp of the craft of music, of understanding the nuances and the mechanics of music, how to weave together disparate melodic and rhythmic lines, how to come up with a whole range of kind of expressive characteristics in the music. It was really impressive. One of the best pieces I've seen by an undergrad, not to mention, I think you were a freshman at the time. So, and then I remember the second course we took together, It was a film scoring theme. That was the subject of the class. And you did something very different for that one. You composed a bluegrass-inspired film score for a documentary about car racing in North Carolina, which was great. Really showcased your versatility in addition to your craft. So you've written a new piece for us, a solo piano piece that we're going to hear in a little bit. Quite a substantial work with yourself performing, and I've heard it. I'm really excited to share it with everyone watching. And after we play the piece, we'll continue to chat, and I'll try and kind of pick your brain a little bit about the piece and your compositional process in general. I would also like to point out to anyone watching that there will be some time at the end. We'll keep some time for audience questions. So you should be able to just type a question into the portal there, and we'll be able to see it. And you can use me as your mouthpiece, and I'll ask Alex some audience questions. That's always really fun, part of the interview. Alex, I think before we get on to the piece that you've written for this performance, it's always interesting and fun, for me at least, to know a bit about the backstory of musicians and artists. I was wondering if you could share a little bit, kind of paint a picture of where you grew up and when you started performing and composing music, how you got started.
Sure. Yeah. Let me see. I got started when I was 5 years old. I started taking piano lessons. So piano is kind of my primary instrument. And then in middle school, so I started 6th grade. I played in the school band. So I started playing trumpet then. And I still continue playing both of those instruments up until now. I've been playing trumpet in the UNC Wind Ensemble. And I've been playing piano, or I'm going to be playing piano in the piano ensemble next semester. So yeah, I've been keeping up with that. And then I started composing when I was 13. So also in middle school. And I started out primarily composing for piano because that was what I knew then. And so I've also performed a couple of my compositions here and then. Sometimes for if I win a competition or anything like that, I'll perform the piece. And sometimes my compositions have also been performed by string quartets and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I've been in music for a long time now.
Yeah, I guess 5 years old. And so you mentioned that some of your first pieces that you started to compose were kind of influenced by the piano pieces that you were playing. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started out, very much like typical classical influence. So not like classical music as a broad genre, but like the classical era from the 1700s,
Okay.
the early 1800s. So Beethoven, Mozart, that sort of stuff. I think as I grew and I was exposed to different music and different genres, I think my music also reflects that change.
Oh, great. So you mentioned a few influences there, some classical composers. Did you have any mentors or instructors that kind of encouraged you to keep composing, or was this largely a kind of a self-motivated impulse that you had to try and write music?
I think at the beginning it was definitely self-motivated. I remember I was playing piano one time, and my grandmother told me I should start composing, and I said that sounds fun. So that was the first time I started writing. And the first piece I ever wrote was a sonata for piano, which I never finished. I think even at that time I realized that it wasn't really that good because I didn't really know what I was doing. So but then I tried again and I wrote a short prelude for piano, and ever since then I've been composing. But yeah, so my influences and teachers have really helped me along the way. So I guess recently I've been getting into a lot more modern music, so neoclassical, like Prokofiev or Stravinsky, some Stravinsky, stuff like that. And I've also had a lot of great teachers along the way, yourself included. Um, but Also, I went to a summer camp at the UNC School of the Arts, and I met Michael Rothkopf there, and he was one of my first composition teachers. Um, and I also took lessons from Dr. Alan Anderson when I was in high school, who is your colleague at the Department of Music at UNC.
Right, and Alan has also moderated a few of these Compose Carolina events as well. So that's interesting to hear you talk. It's almost like you're, well, first of all, thanks to your grandmother. It's amazing that such a small, quick little comment could have potentially triggered a lifelong endeavor. It's amazing how these little things can snowball like that. But I'm interested to hear you talk about, the looking back at those very early pieces and then leading up to the piece that you've written that we're going to hear in a little bit. Do you see any kind of a trajectory, kind of a narrative of how your compositional voice has evolved, and if you're kind of following any particular threads that are, helping you to develop a unique voice that we're going to maybe hear an example of today?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the evolution of a composer's personal voice is always, it's very difficult. It's a difficult process, and I don't know if it's ever completed. But yeah, I think as I started out, I was very conservative, harmony, rhythm, all that sort of stuff. It was very very like cut and dry because I didn't understand a lot of like the nuances or like all the things that have happened since Beethoven was alive in music. So I think that as I've been exploring different genres, both like listening and playing different music, I think I've been exposed to a lot of different ideas, and I kind of pick and choose from each of those like styles and influences, and I think through that I'm finding what I like, and it helps me develop my own personal voice.
Yeah, I can definitely sympathize and relate to what you said about how long and seemingly sometimes excruciating the process is of kind of finding out what kind of music you want to write. There's as many kinds of music as there are of anything that you could even choose to do, and sometimes it's overwhelming. And I feel like it's something, like you say, that just has to happen naturally by writing music and kind of looking back on what you've written. I'd like to turn now a bit toward the piece that we're going to hear. As you know, the theme of the Compose Carolina series is called Looking Forward. So all of the composers featured on the series have tried to include that theme somehow, have it influence the work either directly or indirectly in different ways. We've seen examples of the composers on this series kind of including that theme in their piece. Your piece is titled Introduction and Rondo for What Lies Ahead. So clearly you've been thinking about the theme with this piece. I wonder if you could give us a bit of context for how that idea influenced the piece.
Yeah. So when I was thinking about the theme in relation to this piece is very much a personal expression of what I feel looking towards my future. I don't know if it's supposed to be universal and apply to everybody, but I hope some people relate to, I guess, the music and what I'm trying to say. And so, as the title notes, there are two main sections. There is an introduction and a rondo, and each of those two sections kind of represents the emotions the conflicting emotions that I feel towards my own future. So yeah, the introduction, very hesitant and tentative, and that part's kind of supposed to represent when I look forward, like the apprehensiveness I feel towards the future, kind of like the uncertainty. So yeah, a lot of suspensions, extended chords, things like that, to kind of emphasize that. And then the rondo is pretty different. It's very fast and driving, and that part's supposed to represent like the excitement that I feel looking towards the future. So like an excitement to move forward, and like looking forward in the colloquial sense. So like being excited for what's going to happen. So I think those two sections kind of sum up how I envision the future, how I feel about it.
I like that clever reinterpretation of looking forward. I hadn't thought about that yet. Yeah, a couple of things to ask about that. First of all, for those of us that don't know all of the music terminology, what exactly is a rondo?
Yeah, so a rondo is very much a classical form. So getting back to my roots, Beethoven and Mozart wrote a lot of them. And what it is it has a main melody or an A section, and that A section is repeated, and in between each repetition is a contrasting section. So it'll be the A section, then the B section, then the A section again, then the C section, and then A, and then D, and so on and so forth. And then usually it has a coda at the end. So it's pretty repetitive, I think, by nature, because it has that A section that always keeps coming back and keeps you grounded.
Yeah, and it struck me the interesting tension, and I mentioned this before, of the selection of the rondo form with this theme, because the rondo, as you just pointed out, is kind of notable for the repetition of that A section. Sometimes it's described as abacaba, right? A-B-A-C-A-B-A, or abacada in this case. Always A coming back. And I find it fascinating that that tension between looking forward into the future in a kind of a linear sense of continual change and newness, being overlaid onto this idea of constant recurrence and like kind of a cyclical view of time. Is that something that was on your mind, the tension between the rondo form and the theme of looking forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was deliberate. I think between the theme and the form. So the rondo, as I hope everyone hears, it changes every time it comes back. So the A section, it has the same melody every time, but it's sometimes there's different rhythms, or there's different harmonies, or it's in a different register on the piano. So each time it's different, and I like that idea because it kind of represents our like multifaceted view of the future. There's a lot of different options and a lot of different paths that we could go down, but they all kind of have like the same like general shape and form. So the melody keeps the form grounded, but there's a lot of different ways that it can be presented within the piece. So yeah,
that's an amazing way to interpret such a simple concept as like a form, a form structure. How you can kind of apply music is like that, right? It's abstract enough that we can apply these very kind of personal and complex kind of scenarios onto something that's so simple. That this idea of a continuity, maybe in this case, ourselves constantly being reinterpreted and reimagined as different situations arise. I think that's very clever and a very cool concept. I think I'd like to play the piece, but I would, as I mentioned earlier, this is quite a substantial piece. This is about 10 minutes long, and you're playing the piece yourself. And it's just there's no you've trimmed all the fat. There's just like a lot of music packed into these 10 minutes. So with that in mind, I was wondering if there was any kind of cliff notes you could give the listeners, any kind of helpful tips for how to listen to the piece, especially when we just kind of listening for the first time. Sometimes it's useful to have a few things to kind of look out for.
Oh yeah, certainly. I guess the introduction's fairly long for an introduction, so don't get settled into the introduction, because then right when you do, it kind of changes, and it goes right into the rondo. And the first, actually, I guess, 3 notes of the piece are 3 chords, and those are the same notes that begin the rondo section too. So you can see that when I transition from the introduction to the rondo, I play around with that idea to show the relationship between the two. And as I mentioned earlier, there's the A section repeats in between contrasting sections. So one of the contrasting sections, the C section, has material from the introduction to contrast in between when the rondo repeats. So I guess look out for that. And because I like the use of repeating material to make the piece sound more cohesive. So yeah, definitely look out for that, because the material in the introduction doesn't just stay in the introduction. It reappears. Other than that, yeah, I mean, it's just it's a fun piece.
Great. And just to make it clear, so the introduction is quite slow, and then as soon as you hear the piece kind of kick into overdrive and get really rhythmically driving, that's the beginning of the rondo. If you're looking out for that A theme that keeps coming back, it's right when the piece gets kind of loud and fast, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's gonna be pretty slow. A lot of there's going to be slowing down and speeding up, that sort of stuff, but nothing really substantial until we get to the rondo, and that part should be fairly obvious just by the change in tempo and the change in mood.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's not delay anymore. I'm excited to share this with you. This is, again, the title is Introduction and Rondo for What Lies Ahead by Alex McKeveny, performed by Alex McKeveny. Wow, amazing.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. In this peculiar format, that performance is not met with a roaring applause. You'll have to deal with me and my. But hopefully, one day you'll get to play that in front of a live audience and get the applause that it deserves.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Compose Carolina definitely got their money's worth with that commission. As I said, it's just jam-packed. It's 10 minutes, but it feels like 3 or 4. You're just constantly in the moment. There's just an unending parade of cool grooves and catchy melodies and beautiful, lush chords. And then the performance as well. I mean, to me, I was looking for a cut somewhere, but it looked like a single take. Is that right?
Yeah, I absolutely did it in a single take because I struggle with editing videos, so I figured it was just easier to just do it in a single take. So yeah.
That's your old school traditional side coming out again, right?
Yeah, it took quite a while to get it
I bet.
correctly.
And I mean, I am just initially struck by the kind of the heft and the breadth of the piece. I mean, sorry to start with such a superficial question, but how long did it take you to compose that and then to learn how to perform it perfectly?
Yeah, well, I guess it's been actually quite a while in the making. I first wrote down the theme, I guess the ideas for the introduction, almost a year ago. When I was in actually the first class I took with you, when I was working on that orchestral piece. I was, working on it and I was trying to come up with ideas, and I came up with kind of some of the ideas that you hear in the introduction, but I realized that they didn't work for the piece I was writing then. So I kept them and I was like, I'll use those at a later date. And so I've hung on to them for quite a while now. And then the Rondo theme, I started writing in mid-May or late May. And it wasn't until June that I had the idea to put the two together. So combining those two ideas that I had and developing them and editing them went through June and early July, and then I performed it in early July. So and I want to give a special shout out to my piano teacher, Miss Bonnie Walker, who was so gracious enough to let me use her piano to record on. So thank you to her.
That was her piano.
Yes. Yeah. So
sounded great.
Yeah, it's a great piano. So that was quite a treat. So yeah.
I mean,
so I guess about a year in the making.
Wow. I mean, it's a great old composer's trick, right? To just save everything and keep it handy. Music is kind of like that too. It's so malleable that something that you think you have no use for at one point suddenly can be the central part of a piece in the future. So that's smart that you're doing that, saving everything. I mean, there's so much to appreciate. As I mentioned, there's so much contrast. There's like the introduction, which is so lyrical and beautiful. And then there's these kind of grooving, syncopated parts. As I said, all these hooks and things. I think just pick one aspect of the music, and this might reveal my particular bias as a listener, but I was struck by the harmony. There's so many beautiful chord progressions, kind of these very unexpected chord shifts that at the same time seem kind of inevitable in retrospect. There's very few what you'd call bland kind of chords, like just a simple major chord, for example. Everything's extended, kind of chromatic, sliding around. It's just really bold and yet totally confident at the same time. And I know we've taken a couple of classes together, and I'm pretty sure that I didn't teach you all of those tricks, maybe one or two, but definitely not all of them. So I'm kind of wondering where you learned to use the chords and harmony in such a sophisticated and kind of elaborate way. Is that from playing piano pieces or music theory, or is that something that's self-taught?
Well, I mean, first of all, don't sell yourself short. I mean, you helped me quite a bit. But
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of it was from playing piano repertoire because I think that helps me a lot, not just because I'm getting exposed to like new ideas and stuff like that, but also because it helps me see it from the aspect of performance as well. So composition, I think, it's kind of isolated from performance sometimes. Like composers are
Right.
like, I'll perform it this way. I don't care what the performers want or what's going to be easiest. I want it this way, and that's final. And so I think seeing it from the performance side is also useful because you get to hear how it sounds when it's played, and I think being informed on that is also very, very helpful. And
Right.
absolutely, yeah. I like to studying scores while I'm listening to the music also to see. So again, hearing how it sounds while I'm looking at the music is I find is a lot of the way I learn.
I like that. So just kind of performance being a link between what we consider like the cerebral analysis of music, and then the physiological, like the way it feels in your fingers and the way it sounds in your ears, kind of constantly reinforcing each other. Kind of gives you a much more nuanced and maybe more opportunities as a composer, more things to think about that you could include in a piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite helpful. So
Well, I hate to reduce a piece, or even more so, a composer, down to a series of influences. You know, that's something that we do all too immediately sometimes. But it's fun also to kind of talk about other influences, even though it doesn't possibly tell the whole story behind the creative result. I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about some compositional influences in this piece, and I can kind of share what I heard, and you can kind of confirm or deny whether I'm hearing it correctly. But
sure, yeah.
there's one reason I bring it up is just because there's so many influences in this piece. You talked about Beethoven being one of your first influences, and one of the things that he's famous for, I think, one of the many things, is the kind of elaboration on what were in the classical period quite simple forms, right? Sonata form, rondo form. Beethoven is known for really expanding these, kind of exploding them into these large scale things, adding introductions, adding long transitions, codas, just adding and adding. And, when you say introduction and rondo, and then it becomes this 10-minute kind of just assault of like music of all different kinds, that reminds me of a bit of Beethoven, his approach to form. And then, but the material itself, not so much. Maybe I'm hearing much more modern influences in the kind of the chords and the melodies and the grooving rhythms. I don't know, the introduction reminded me a lot of Debussy. Very lovely. These kind of big, lush chords moving in parallel, almost impressionistic at times. And then once it kicked in to overdrive, it's like virtuosic kind of piano music, like Liszt, Chopin, with these virtuosic flurries. And of course, the jazz influence is really strong. You haven't talked about jazz, but clearly you listen to jazz. I mean, it sounded like Art Tatum soloing at times.
I mean, I'm very impressed by yeah. I mean, a lot of that is very accurate. Yeah, I think that you can pretty clearly hear a lot of the influences that I was, or like stuff that I was listening to as I was writing it. So yeah, absolutely, the introduction. I was going for an impressionistic feeling, so I listened to a lot of Debussy, Ravel, and stuff like that. A lot of their piano works too. for that kind of section. And yeah, I mean, I've been listening to a lot more modern stuff recently. So like jazz pianists like Art Tatum and Oscar Peterson are really, I love watching them and listening to them and analyzing their performances. So yeah, you're absolutely right on the money with that.
Oscar Peterson is another great one. I mean, both of them are known for just their blazing right hand, right? Just up and down, these like single note lines. But do you play jazz or have you studied it?
Not, I mean, I know a couple of like standard tunes, but I wouldn't say I'm a jazz pianist at all. So it's difficult for me because I grew up so much practicing classical music that it's difficult for me to jump that bridge now since I'm so used to one particular genre. So yeah, but I'd love to be able to play more. So
yeah, I mean, you certainly got the language down. I'm hearing all the blues scales in there, that kind of chromatic, kind of blues notey type stuff in certain parts of the rondo. So that's made me think that you must have some experience playing it, or at least studying it. For composers, but especially non-composers, when you kind of hear something like this, like a 10-minute, really elaborate kind of piece of music, I think one of the questions is just like, how do you even do that? How do you even begin to put something like that together? I guess you call that the compositional process. I mean, is it possible for you to break down, like, this is step one, maybe step two, step three? Do you have a kind of a standard process for, like I said, how do you even begin on something that ends up like that?
Yeah. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, it's a very long process. So most of the time it begins with me improvising at the piano. I find that that's
Cool.
kind of the way what I'm drawn towards. And so I'll either like record myself, or if I have like an idea I want to hang on to, I'll write it down. And so that's like what I alluded to with the introduction. I was improvising at the piano, and that's how I first came up with that.
Wow.
Over a year ago. So I compose at the piano. So I guess that's kind of what I'm drawn towards. And then after that, it's a lot of like development. Like what do I want to say or accomplish with this music? And so defining a goal, and then moving towards that goal. How do I make this music say that? And then it becomes a lot of like editing and trial and error. Like trying out different chords and seeing what fits with the idea that I have in my head. So a lot of times I have a preconceived notion of kind of what I want to say and accomplish. And so I'll try out different like things and see, does that sound right there? Maybe not. So I'll try something else. And it's a lot of that until I finally get to something where that's what I want. That's what I want it to sound like. And just keep doing that over and over again.
Over and over again, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the key part, over and over again. I love that you're combining like kind of rigorous compositional ideas, like a formal structure like rondo, but then introducing into that, the kind of the mysterious world of improvisation and inspiration, kind of when those two kind of things, the structure that holds it together, like the architecture, and that mysterious inspiration and that comes from improvising and following whatever is guiding your ear, seems to be a pretty effective model for a lot of composers.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it combines like the creativity is part of it, because you get to explore the form, but then you're still kind of constrained by it. So I find that very helpful, I guess, in writing music, because it kind of limits the possibilities for you, which I find a little bit more helpful. Because without that, you're left with just so many possibilities. It's impossible to narrow it down what you want to do. So defining the form. So here, like the introduction in rondo, is it's helpful for me in the process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, congratulations again on this piece. Looks like we're starting to get a couple questions from the audience, which is great. I'll try and read one here from Avery. Avery's asking you, once you started seriously composing, did it change how you listened to other great works? If so, how? Great question.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think it absolutely changed it. I think once you start composing, I mean, most people like have an appreciation for like, or they don't they understand kind of what musicians do when they compose, but I don't think you really gain that appreciation until you do it yourself. Because like I knew kind of how it was done, but then when you start doing it, you realize, what actually goes into it, all the work that goes into writing music. And so I just remember like thinking like, wow, when I was like first started, I wouldn't have been able to do this, you know. So it's very much definitely I appreciate it a lot more of not even just the great works, but just music in general, because it's so difficult to capture. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's, listening is a very mysterious thing and a complicated thing depending on the context. But I can relate, once you try and do something, then you listen from the perspective of like, how would I do that, or how did they do that? And it totally changes the way it makes it, I think, more exciting to listen to music, and especially music that you think I couldn't do that, or I'm wondering what's going on to make the music do that. So in some ways, it really adds another level of like excitement to the listening experience, for me at least.
Oh yeah, no,
It can have
absolutely.
it can have the flip side too, I guess. If you listen to the same chord progression and you're immediately able to identify that, it kind of loses a bit of the magic, possibly. So it could be a double-edged sword, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I've experienced a little bit of that too.
Questions are coming in. Here's one about something that's on all our minds: the quarantine, the coronavirus quarantine. How has being quarantined affected your practice? Do you find that you are more inspired or less, or is it a mix?
I guess yeah. I mean, there's definitely it's very useful, I think, to be able to lock myself up in my room and just work. I think that's pretty great. Um, and I have my parents both work from home, so it's been difficult to like practice and stuff because they're always on calls and stuff like that. But in between all that, yeah, I mean but the composing part is pretty um, silent, so I can do that mostly while they're working. But yeah, I think quarantining is overall, I'd say it's been pretty helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely worse occupations to be doing than composing when dealing with isolation and a lot of quiet time, right? Um, I suppose one thing that's a struggle is, that helps you in particular, is that you're a performer and you can perform your music. I think for composers maybe that aren't as adept, it might be a challenge to, like the question asked, to stay inspired when you don't have that kind of the physical real-time engagement with the music. But I think a lot of the composers, have been using music technology, quite adeptly, to kind of help with that situation. We saw examples of composers collaborating by emailing music back and forth, and kind of hearing mock-ups of their pieces via the technology and kind of tiding, over until we can all get back together and actually put on some shows again, as strange as that sounds.
Yeah.
Great. Looks like we have a question. Alex, did you have any sort of visual while you were composing this piece? Another good question.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I don't really have, I guess, visuals when I compose. There's, like, I know a lot of composers do. You see a lot of it, like this artwork inspired me, or I was thinking about this thing. But that doesn't happen to me too often. I don't think. Like, I don't see scenery and think like of a melody or something like that. I think it's a little bit more practical when I do it. Like, I only start thinking of melodies when I'm at the piano, or I'm like consciously trying to like think of things or develop musical ideas. So it's very much a conscious process for me. So the visual doesn't really come into it that much.
On the other hand, though, I remember talking to you about, I asked you about the key of this piece. It's in G flat, at least for some extended portions, certainly not the whole time. And I asked you why you put it in such a difficult key with 6 flats, such a challenging key to play in when it's for solo piano. Presumably you could have cranked it up a half step and played it in G major. And you mentioned I think the word you used was warmth. Like, you like the warmth of that key as opposed to G major. And that's a bit of a kind of a synesthetic idea as well. Like, maybe you're not seeing visual images or extra musical ideas, but you seem to have some extra musical sensibilities and maybe a feeling of warmth, or whatever else.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, I think that there are, I guess, extra musical kind of themes to this piece, especially with the theme of like looking forward. So it's, I guess, the I have relationships with music to extra musical themes, but I guess visual arts isn't one of them, or visual like sensing isn't part of that. So the warmth of the key or things like that wouldn't be visual, but yeah, it's definitely part of the piece and how I conceived of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, music is weird. It's very neurological, and depending on your history of performing or listening, it has strange kind of effects on us beyond just listening that are different for everyone. I've noticed that teaching ear training, people hear things very differently based on their experiences with music. Looks like we have another question. This is great. They're flooding in. This one's from Michael. He asks, I noticed a lot of various colors in your playing. Have you considered orchestrating this work, or do you see this as a set work for piano?
Yeah. Well, thank you for, yeah, I try to get a lot of colors out of the piano, so thank you for that. But I think when I first started, I thought about orchestrating it, but as I moved through the piece, I really kind of decided that it was very much set for piano. As you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of like flurries and a lot of references to like very kind of virtuosic piano playing. So when I compose for the piano, I really try to write for that instrument. So make it so that it's unable to be reproduced on another instrument or another group of instruments. Otherwise, I would just write it for those instruments. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So when I set out to write a piece for an instrument or a group of instruments, I really try to make it so that that piece it fits with the piano, for example. So being pianistic is a goal whenever I write for piano, or being orchestral is a goal whenever I'm writing for orchestra. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly hear it sometimes when people orchestrate a piano piece, that it was written for piano. I mean, there's certain things that are just pianistic in nature, that, especially these fast kind of arpeggios that can sometimes come across a little bit forced when they're orchestrated. So it can be a challenge. On the other hand, I suppose it could lead to some very new ideas, right? If you kind of set yourself up for in that situation, try and like solve compositional riddles. New ideas can kind of come to you.
Yeah.
Well, Alex,
Yeah,
I think we're almost out of time. Um, I just wanted to thank you again for sharing your music, and I know you've got a couple years left at UNC, so I'm looking forward to working with you in classes in the future and hearing a lot more of your music. I'm hoping that you'll be composing for a long time to come, because you have quite an exceptional talent, and it's just more than anything, it's just really fun to hear what you come up with every new piece. So thanks for sharing with us today.
thank you for all your kind words, and thanks to CPA for having both of us, and for commissioning
Absolutely.
me.
Thank you,
Yeah,
CPA.
it's
Mhm. And
been a great opportunity.
yeah, and I encourage everyone, I believe that this video will be posted on their website. If you want to go back and listen to that piece again and kind of take it in a second or a third time, I encourage you to do that. Also encourage you to join us next week. I think same place, same time. We'll be doing our last installment of the Compose Carolina series with composer James Larkins, who I think is a colleague and friend of yours, Alex.
Yeah, I had a class with him this past semester with you. Yeah.
Yeah, really looking forward to that, and hopefully you can all join us. And thanks again for watching. See you then.